Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Anastasia Dedyukhina. I'm director of Consciously Digital Institute, and this is our podcast where we discuss where technology is taking the society and how it impacts each of us individually. And today my guest is Georg Zoeller, who is a technologist with more than 20 years of international experience, who worked in top tech companies such as Meta, who has seen it all over the last 25 years, and who's currently based in Singapore, working in health tech, but also running two organizations that help people make sense of AI and really undo all the myths about artificial intelligence.
Hi, Georg. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a big pleasure to have
Hi.
you. And my first question is, we're speaking, it's almost December 2025, and 2025 has been a year when lots of things happened in the AI space. And really, if we look back, like even like 5 years ago, 3 years ago, probably not many people expected that this is how it would be developing. What would you say? What did happen? I mean, not in terms of like who bought whom, but what happened for us as a society of the last maybe 2, 3 years that maybe we're still trying to figure out.
I don't know. I think we're continuing a certain trajectory. Investments in AI are still the only investments being made, right? Like we're not funding anything else, basically. People in sustainability and all kind of other fields have been defunded because AI is the singular focus. Is that good for society? I doubt it, but it is what it is. It's also the year, I think, where when we look at the narrative of maybe generative AI, there's like specific phases, right? We started with, I think, AGI, right? Like ChatGPT comes out and people start dreaming of AGI. If we just train the models bigger and bigger. And that ran out last year, didn't work anymore. So the narrative had to shift. It shifted to if we just pump more and more compute into it, then test time compute, like if instead of training the model, we just spend more energy running it, it will be as smart. I think we hit that wall to some extent too. But the primary narrative shift, I think, has been from AGI by just shoving more data into an LLM to agents, right? Like 2025 was the year when everything switched to agents. Right. And maybe the other thing that happened this year is it's the year of open source. I think open source is not just catching up, it's rewriting the economics of the field. When we look at DeepSeek, for example, in January. And it's also the year, I think, where the evaluations and the expectations have truly detached from reality. And where everyone is now standing and going, when is this bubble going to pop, right? It's not even the question anymore, is it a bubble? It's just how badly will it pop?
Um, There are so many things you said. I guess the thing that keeps me awake, I don't know. I'll ask you later what keeps you awake. The thing that keeps me awake is like why are we only investing in technological solutions? And right now it's AI, right? Like a few years ago it was something else, right? It was metaverse or other things. Uh, why did we buy into this narrative? And by I mean societies, governments, companies. What's behind it?
I mean, it's a fairly fundamental question, but it's also very simple. It's very simple because I think we can probably say that there is really only one top line metric that is enshrined in most societies at this point. Is the reason that every single one of us is going out there at a certain time of the day and is coming back and is working and so on. And that is we're in a capitalistic system and the top line metric is growth. And when you look at it from that perspective, you see that somewhere, depending on when a nation becomes developed and so on, you hit that stage when growth is plateauing, when you no longer get the tailwinds that are native, like upgrading your infrastructure and demographic growth, more or less. So the physical economy in most Western countries had hit that point somewhere probably in the 2000s or 90s. And then growth becomes hard, right? Like a normal company has margins around 3-5% or something like that, a little bit more. And then along comes the internet, right? And the internet, which was very apparent, is offering a new field for growth. We call that digitalization, and it's kind of a left hand, right hand. We're shifting our physical economy into the digital economy. And the digital economy, therefore, posts double-digit growth rates. And around 98, I think Google is the company that really realized this, the trajectory, and that was really the internet. The internet created a copy of the world, right? Because what we did with technology, or what we always do with technology first, is we're creating a copy, right? The website is your storefront, but 24/7 and accessible from everywhere once we add the phone to it, right? That's a fundamental shift that removes economic barriers. You can now shop 24/7, and you can now shop from anywhere, wherever you are. Obviously, that increases economic activity. But it also, we made a bit of a mistake there. We gave it an unfair advantage, right? There were no taxes for digital purchases for the first 10 years in most countries, sometimes 20. And even more, we don't enforce the laws that are on the books for physical business. If a physical business sold the things Amazon sells, they would be sued out of business for safety violations, for people getting hurt, for all of these kind of things. But we tolerated it in the digital space. So there are two effects. One is the speeding up of economic activity, and of course expanding it all over the globe with the internet. But the other one is the erosion of societal guardrails that happen. And when you take both of those, you get double-digit growth rates. Silicon Valley created the infrastructure for that, where cities for the physical economy have to build roads and electricity and so on. Silicon Valley is private entity build the infrastructure for the digital economy, and are now the gatekeepers. They are owning it completely, right? And what that caused is that investors started looking from the physical economy into the digital economy. When you're asking why are we only investing in technology, it's that. It's easy, it's easier to scale, and it has double-digit growth rates. And in fact, in the early 2000s or mid-2000s, Silicon Valley realized our actual product isn't ads, it's not these apps, it's not any of these things, it's growth. Because if the primary customer is pension funds and everyone who needs growth to grow their wealth, right? You only can invest in things that grow above market rate, above inflation, because otherwise, people can't meet their retirement goals. What if we sold growth? So most large tech companies changed their business to sell growth. And it's a fairly easy deal. You make a narrative. You said, we're going to grow like this. And for the first 10, 15 years of the internet, or 20 years of the internet, really, that's very easy. We just connect more people to the internet, economic activity on the internet growth, and we build the infrastructure to it. At some point, internet in India was synonymous with Facebook, right? So when I worked at Facebook, we run out and we try to shoot satellites into space, build Wi-Fi, build undersea cables and so on to grow the economy, or grow the business by just connecting more people to the internet. And so digital growth has become the one thing that everyone sees growth rates in, and because growth is the #1 top line of capitalism, we end up in that place. And Silicon Valley has the business model of selling what is the next growth frontier. And that was easy while there was no competition, meaning until TikTok showed up, right? And that was easy while the internet was growing, right? But around 2016, that party came to an end. Donald Trump made clear he didn't like investments in other countries. Cambridge Analytica showed us that there's really serious side effects in just letting these people run roughshod. And so Silicon Valley became concerned. And you can see what happens when the growth narrative runs out, I think in 2022, just before AI became big. Twitter failed, right? It basically collapsed in stock so low that a single person could ask his Saudi friends for money and buy it. Meta was at $98 or something like that. It's 700 something. Fundamentally the same company. So the narrative is everything. Silicon Valley, the stock is the growth, is the narrative, is the product. And you always need a new narrative. So around 2016, when stuff was starting to run out, when the end was in sight, when we later saw TikTok exploding and basically taking a lot of the free space away, you have to ask, what are the economic boundaries, how you can still create growth? And you needed something fundamental. So you had crypto, which is like, we're going to take the money away from the bankers. That's the narrative. It didn't work because the bankers were establishment, they had government contacts, and they very rightly pointed out, you don't want these people who created so much harm with Cambridge Analytica and all these other things also run your banking system, right? That's kind of insane. So when that kind of came to a halt, there were multiple attempts, Web3, NFT, and then metaverse as kind of the desperate growth. And why does that work? Because you go to governments and you tell them, well, what if we copied the real world economy and then, every building you can sell again on the internet and people buy digital growth. Think about how much we can grow stuff, right? So the narratives aren't accidental. We go to governments and we tell them, this is how you're going to grow. And when you're not investing in anything else but technology, and when you're fundamentally out of ideas of how you could grow your economy, then you're just doomed to accept what Silicon Valley sells you. We go to private companies, we go to the finance sector, and we tell them, you're going to grow your business with agent to agent, for example, this year. It's completely insane.
Why?
Because the technology can't do, but that's a longer topic, right? You cannot do what people say you can do. Agents are basically fundamentally impossible as making critical decisions, and money decisions are critical decisions. Procurement decisions are critical decisions. It can be subverted. There's lots of reasons. And we're about 5 to 10 years away from making that work, right? But think about it much simpler. You're a Shein, you're a Walmart, you're an Amazon. You have spent the last 10, 20 years optimizing your business to sell. There's no friction in that funnel. Adding 2 AI agents, one on each side, is adding compute and friction to something. It's like taking the wheel, which is a pretty pure invention, and bolting AI to the side of it, and then it hobbles around. Right? There's lots of like slay of hands. Like Amazon says, AI shopping added $10 billion to the bottom line. But that's a sleight of hand, because when you look at what they did is they took the customer service that they had cut to a minimum already, and they made some investments into it, primarily helping people find better products on their website. And then they're saying AI is doing that. But in reality, it's just better search and a better customer service experience, really. It's not agents, it's not making decisions, it's not any of these things. It's just we're slobbering AI onto every product today because it's the only way investors reward you. And it's the only way you get money, it's the only way you get headcount, it's the only way you get growth. So we created there's a self-reinforcing cycle of, we created a top line, which is, let's say here in Singapore, AI adoption by SMEs is a government top line. So then the regulator is like, well, how we do that? Or like the ecosystem people are looking, how do we do that? And then Microsoft comes and says, well, it's pretty simple. You give everyone Copilot and then they have adopted AI, right? So inadvertently, we created a metric that is spent money, which is always very easy to meet, but usually doesn't have the outcome you're expecting. So now every company, people are using Copilot to make emails longer and include phrases like, yes, Georg, you're absolutely right. And then the managers are using AI to summarize those emails, and Microsoft makes money from the subsidies and Microsoft makes money from the compute. But does it add anything to the economy? I kind of doubt it. Right? That's not to say that the technology isn't real. Don't get me wrong. I have a very nuanced position on this. but the narratives about what the technology is doing and capable of are not so real.
So lots of food for thought in what you have shared. I would like to go back for a moment to this narrative of governments have bought into the idea that the way to solve growth is to adopt more technology, because it's almost like endless growth, almost, because we're still in the Earth, on planet Earth. We still are limited in terms of our rare materials, of water, of whatever power runs the data centers, but it still feels like better perspective rather than just selling physical goods. And then what does happen then, if the government adopts this view, then the next step is to convince people that they need this as well. And it's actually pretty difficult to convince people to do that. But obviously, like if you force them like to sit in front of the screens, if you force QR codes, if basically all their lives starts being in digital, we know from the research that the earlier, like for example, the more time you spend on Zoom or like with other technologies, and the easier it is to you like to sell the next internet thing, right? And you start accepting it as a new normal thing.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, please.
How does the country you live in look in 10 years, society and technology?
It's a very interesting place to be right now, because I've been following a little bit the situation with data centers. Big companies are trying to come here because it's cheap, because they have solar energy here, because they have also water in certain regions in the northern Spain. And there is a real fight, because some mayors say, no, we don't need the data centers. Because they're actually not creating jobs. They are
No, they're not.
increasing they're increasing the cost of living because of the energy bills. Like we don't have the infrastructure for that. They're consuming our water. But most, because Spain is quite a poor country, are very happy to accept that. Spain has become kind of the place where most companies like Meta or so have third parties that work for them, where we literally have slaver labor, where there are people like who are moderators in communities are sitting working 12-hour shifts, getting paid peanuts, but still happy to be here because it's kind of an EU country. You're kind of still protected. And at the same time, you have like lots of startups that are trying to change the world. So it's interesting, and we do have a counter movement, which is like people buying land, people like trying to build their complete expecting that something is going to crash, which probably is.
Where I'm going with that question is
Yes.
more, 10, 15 years from now, how does Spain look like? How has AI, technology, whatever you imagine has changed your country? How do you
that's where I'm getting. So I think it's getting in two ways. I think it's going to be much more like the technology is going to be used much more to control people, for sure. Whether it's surveillance, whether it's work. I think we're probably going into universal basic income. And I think we're probably going to have a number of people who are really trying to live off grid. And lots of people, and I think that we're going to see a big split. What's your view on that? How's Singapore
My view
going?
on that is that when you go to places like Singapore or China and you ask this question, the answer you're getting is not I think, whatever. The answer is here's how it's going to look. It's like I give you, in the physical economy here in Singapore, if you want to know how Singapore looks in 10 years, you go to a place called onemap.gov.sg. There's a 3D model of how the city looks in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. So you have certainty. You see where the investments are going, you see what the plans are, they get updated, right? If you go to China, you ask the question like, how will society look like? How especially society look like? How will technology look like? There's a 15-year plan. So everyone has the answer.
Is that a good thing?
There's a plan, right? And there's a vision, and you can agree or disagree with decision China makes about its society, but it's making decisions about society. Meaning, so the technology and society and progress get integrated into a roadmap of where the country wants to go. And that roadmap gets published, and that roadmap is clear and creates planning certainty. So if you ask someone, how will it look like? They will tell you, well, we have a 5 and 10 year low altitude economy plan. So here's what drones are going to do, right? Here's what that will do to the traffic on the road. Here's what that will enable. Here's how it will revitalize rural areas that now have potentially direct, not just goods, but also patient transport, for example, to central hospital hubs. We are low altitude economy vehicles and so on, right? And if you, no such thing exists in Western countries, in part because the government system just doesn't allow it. Planned for 15 years, but like you can't agree on anything and governments change. Like the Western democracies are limited by their time horizon, right? It's a serious concern. And the problems we're facing, especially the problems with technology, require long-term vision. And when you don't have a vision and you don't have a North Star and you don't have a plan, right, then you are doomed to accept the vision that is being pushed on you. Right? So when Silicon Valley comes and says, here's how the future is going to look like, sometimes it fails, like metaverse and so on. But we spend significant money. We invite EU stakeholders to metaverse summits that are full of, you know, Facebook employees that are cheering or something like that because no one has a headset in Europe at the time. But like we push that narrative and we say, here is how you go north. And north is always where the growth is because that's the North Star, right? And that is different in China because you sit down and you talk about how do we want society to look at with these technological things. And I'll give you an example why that really matters, right? It was completely predictable to us what will happen with deepfakes, right? It's completely clear to us, all of these negative side effects were clear to everyone who understood the technology. Right? And some of these things you could have sat down and just have a conversation and say, should we draw a red line for society? But we haven't. Instead, we wait. We wait because we're afraid of trading off growth that might be happening somewhere. And what that leads to is, you know, I talked about how big tech companies we're running out of growth and growth narrative. What that leads to is that growth pressure is asserting itself in very negative ways. For Facebook or Meta, 10% of the business is now from scams, right? The Reuters investigation that had all the internal papers that say 10% of the business, $16 billion, is from scams. Why? Because instead of banning scammers, when they're reported, when the systems that, you know, and the few people left who look after integrity flag them, no, we're going to disincentivize them. We're going to charge them more money. Do scammers pay with their own credit cards? Right? Like, does that actually disincentivize them or just let's bring it? No, it doesn't. It just increases the cost of business and Meta is taking a larger and larger chunk, right? So you have 10% of the business coming from scams and the victims are being double victimized because the amount of money taken is basically going into Facebook. When you look at those papers that also say, hey, because we have the lowest enforcement rates, right? There's this other investigation that showed you had to get 17 infractions for exploiting minors and trafficking before they would ban you from the platform, basically saying we cannot ever ban people from the platform because if we impact user growth negatively, our investors will punish us. What that leads to is that you basically have a crime syndicate that you've been creating, right? In the physical economy, if you pulled something like this, you would end up in jail. If you run a house, like here in Singapore, if you run a house, let's say where there is a vice business, right, in your house, and the moment you become aware of it and the government or didn't do due diligence and the government finds out, they will, you know, probably take your house as a result. But if you do the same on Facebook, you're not affected. Where I'm going with that is these side effects were entirely predictable. you can sit down, you can talk first principles about this for like an hour, and it becomes clear what the side effects are. But we're so afraid of putting guardrails up because we are leaving the future of society to the market. The future
Not
of
just to
society
our
is there, but
market,
we're
but to the
funding
US
growth.
market.
Well, because the US is running the infrastructure for everything, and the US is like US tech companies are creating the North Star. They're laying the road in the direction. They're saying, here's the future, whether or not that is metaverse or AI. And that future is, of course, written from their perspective that maximally optimizes their business model. When you look at the transformer, you know, the technology underneath generative AI, who invented it? Google, right? 2017, attention is all you need. Why didn't they do AI with it? Like, you know, when you look at all the money, why didn't they do anything with it?
Society wasn't ready.
No, because it didn't fit in the business model. You're in the ivory tower, you invent something really cool. You're still required to go to a product manager, and they're going to have to make it fit somewhere into their plan with their growth goals and, you know, real hard business metrics. And if you go over there in 2017 and they're like, what, this thing costs 1,000 times the energy of Google search and 40% of the output is wrong, come back when you have something serious. Right, so it ended up published because scientists need to publish, or, you know, they find a different job. That's the other KPI. And, you know, Elon's friends picked it up from the dumpster and used it for OpenAI. And a few years later, Microsoft decides, we're going to give you money because this disrupts Google's business model, but not ours. Right. So you can, what that means is that the business model of these companies is now the filter for innovation. Any innovation in society is coming through these companies, filtered to their business model, and we're wondering why they're getting bigger and bigger and more powerful, right? So I think the argument can be made that Europe needs to get off its ass and get a North Star. And ultimately, it comes down to a very simple question. Where are we willing to draw a red line and risk losing growth? Because is the kind of growth that Meta, 10% of business, is generating, is that really the growth that we want or not?
Well, we can legalize as well, right? Drug dealers, prostitution, weapons. Like if we want to grow, right? It's like
that's what we're doing. We're saying if you do it in digital, we allow it.
Yeah, it's okay
right?
to do it in digital. Yeah.
And fundamentally, it comes down to because we don't want to make decisions anymore. Politics is hard. Everyone, in order to win nomination of their party and everything, has to, you know, make sure all the constituents and lobbyists are happy. And then we end up with people who are not able to make decisions, right?
Why do we not have people taking a stand about this or against that in the society? Because politicians ultimately are, well, essentially they're dependent on people who are voting for them, right? But we don't have this narrative in the society at all, right? We have the narrative, oh, AI is great. Let's all like, we all need digital skills. There is nothing said, discussed in the media. Like the best case where the media gets is like, let's ban social media, which is something we should have been discussing 15 years ago. And by the way, it's not going to help anyways, because we're talking now about like children using like chatbots and talking to them like as if they were their best friends. Is there the lack of awareness in the society? Is it a broken system? Is there like, do we need more education? What needs to happen?
I mean, I go back to that Meta study, right? The 10% revenue. Meta makes more money from scams than the ad industry makes from digital and print ads. In other words, Mark Zuckerberg strangled the media. The media is dead, right? Because fundamentally it's dead because the business model was incompatible with capitalism to some extent, right? At the level that it's being played, like clicks and like all the incentives are misaligned, right? You also have massive societal trends to, you know, short form, and companies like Facebook, what we do, right, is we genetically optimize our products. There isn't the one person with a sinister plan to make the product more addictive. We give our teams a top line metric, which is we want to grow time on platform by 10%. And then they make tons of little experiments and they look at the results. So everyone in the world is subject to dozens of experiments in a year, right? Sometimes when they're a bit more aggressive, we run them down in New Zealand because no one has friends in New Zealand and therefore no one ever finds out. But fundamentally, we A/B test basically, and when metric goes up, we put it into production. When metric doesn't go up, we put it down. And when you put then, let's say, layoff pressure and massive monetary incentives, given the bonuses, right, onto the whole thing, you end up with people who are just, for whatever reason, to pay their hospital bills, to make the next bonus, whatever it is, will just run more and more experiments. And then the question of do we put it into production becomes one. Well, what are the trade-offs? And then you run into two problems. One is many of the societal trade-offs and negative externalities are manifesting over years, so they're not measurable in a month, right? So what's not measurable doesn't exist. And B, if you're under metrics pressure, you're gonna change, what you're willing to do. The greatest example I find, right, is Google. So Google search is getting worse. We can all agree on that, right? And that was a choice. There was a fight in Google, but there was revenue pressure, and there was a fight in Google, and eventually it ended up with the decision, let's make search worse to make more money. Why? Because Google makes money when you spend time looking at ads, right? So you remember you could go there, press I'm feeling lucky, click on the first thing and out. Google introduced endless scroll a year and a half ago. Why would you need that if your goal is to show the best ad? The answer is it's no longer the goal. The goal is now to show you as many ads as possible. You're incentivized to not show the best thing first because that makes people scroll and see more ads, right? And that is necessary because the growth is no longer there. The company has 98% of mobile search, right? You cannot grow. It's a purely defensive arrangement. So how do you get money? If you cannot grow with users, you're going to have to extract more value from either the advertisers or from the users. From the users, it's simple. You show them worse ads. Where are they going to go? Bing, right? And you add more ad breaks into YouTube, and people are still, Google search revenue is going up, but that's a pure, we're back into the end of the 1990s when advertisers on cable TV were trying to cram more and more advertisement minutes into the hour. There are physical limits to this. Eventually, everything is ads, but fundamentally, since companies die when they don't grow anymore, they don't have a choice. They have to cannibalize their users, right? And the advertisers, and this is where it gets really interesting with AI, that is why Meta is investing so heavily into AI, the advertisers make money fundamentally based on the demand for the eyeballs. So the more people want to sell products in a specific space, the more the auction prices go up. So take a medical company, right? I work for a medical company. The cost of user acquisition online is going up dramatically. Not because there's more people, or fewer people who want, let's say, longevity or whatever it is, but because there is more content that is asking to be shown to people who want that, more ads. AI allows to make more content faster. We can agree that there will be more games, more movies, everything more because the friction of creation is going down. And what everyone, like let's say Electronic Arts, for example, video game company, right, is saying we're going to make so many more games, we're going to make so much money for our shareholders, we're going to save so much money because we don't need those pesky artists anymore. It's bullshit. Because all the money that they're going to make from that will have to be paid to market to the same number of eyeballs. The time that people spend playing video games is going up. The day has 24 hours and, minus sleep, minus work, and you have to be back in the office now, right? And ideally work 996 if you're in Silicon Valley. So the time isn't going up, and time is the fundamental limiter of economic activity in the digital space. So all the dreams about AI growing growth, like GDP and so on, are a little bit tricky because you cannot sell more products. But what you're getting is that the gatekeeper who owns all the eyeballs gets to charge more for products. So for the medical company, the prices are going up because there are more and more ads being pushed faster for these kind of services. And it doesn't matter that there isn't more demand, because there's more demand, there's more supply, and the ad auction prices on supply. Right? So it's a brilliant business model. And I think the fatal case, the fatal mistake the EU made is to let these platforms get to the size. Because if you take the day, 24 hours, and you mark a time slice, how much time do people spend online? That is the digital economy. The digital
It's
consumption.
increasing, and it's increasing, and it will be increasing even more.
Yes, but that is the digital economy, and that is owned by 7 companies because they own the demand, right? You can show most businesses are so dependent on the acquisition of users through digital that their business model doesn't work if they stop paying. And so the money gets extracted. If you look around in your room, there's no product that doesn't have an invisible tax on it, like this beer can, AI. That's the ad budget. And in many countries, that ad budget is now larger than the GST or VAT or whatever you call it, right? But it's invisible, so people don't see it. And it's money that is drained out of the economy to those platforms, which are all foreign, right? So when countries say the future is digital, it's a colonial arrangement. It's like, yes, it is, but you're not benefiting from it because the landlord is going to take all the money, and the landlord is using the money they're making to buy the power infrastructure, the data lines, everything underneath, right?
And again, going back to my original question, so why is it that nobody in the society is taking the stand? Is there the lack of knowledge? Is there just like, are we talking about like the level of the corruption in the government? I personally more believe in like the lack of education, but curious to hear your perspective.
Well,
Why in the society people are not taking the stand? Because governments are ultimately, like if we're not talking about China, are responsive to the requests in the society.
let's play that little game of AI, right? Like, you train your model on the things it sees. It doesn't know the things it doesn't know, right? Humans, of course, are phenomenally more efficient at training, but fundamentally, our training comes from our inputs 24/7, right? Our world model is constructed from what we see, what we read, and so on. So now you're spending this amount of time online. And if we can go back to Cambridge Analytica, where the real question underneath of that was, is it plausible that someone paid for the election, right? And I think, what was it, a year ago, Romania, the question came up again, right? Like that candidate, was it Romania? Like one of the Eastern Bloc countries in Europe, where a candidate out of nowhere jumped up because of massive ad spend on TikTok, right? And to me, it's completely obvious. I mean, I worked at these companies, right? And we're 10 years after Cambridge Analytica now. And there is a fundamental question that you have to ask. Does the business work? Can you spend money on ads and people buy something? And the answer is obviously it works. Otherwise, these companies wouldn't be the most important companies on the planet in terms of money and everything. So let's assume ads work. So how do they magically stop at politics? They work for, medical services. They work for consumer goods. They work for the beer can, but somehow they don't work for politics. That seems inconceivable. And then the question is, why are there so little protection for that process, right? And so now we are spending the time spent online with the advent of short form video has sparked, right? I think Ofcom in the UK published a 25% increase in time in a single year, from 2023 to 2024, I think, right? That's about an hour that was added online on average across the entire population, right? So now when people's world model is constantly trained on what they see, and we don't have to go into echo chambers, but you can do that experiment yourself, right? If you have a kid and you're wondering what are they going to see on YouTube, make a new account, run it for 5 minutes and marvel at it being like 75% extremist crap within a very, very short amount of time. And if you even stop for a moment to look at something, the algorithm takes it as a signal to show you more, right? And so we are training everyone's world model on a societal scale, on a reality that is completely and utterly detached from the real world. But they don't get any other inputs anymore. Media is mostly dead, no one reads newspaper, and so on. This is the world for all intents and purposes. And then we're wondering why people act like they do. Right? There's a beautiful graph that shows the cause of death in the United States, distributed by this, from the CDC before this year, so we can still trust it to some extent. It shows how many people die by suicide, by disease, heart disease, all of these things. And then there's a graph of what the media covers. A beautiful graph because it shows you that the media covers a very different world. But if you're looking at the decisions made today, we're in Europe staring at the United States and we're going, are they insane? How can you abandon your public health agencies? Like, why are you massively cracking down on immigrants? You're doing tremendous damage to your businesses because even if you wanted to control immigration, you don't use any nuance. You're literally taking a hammer. Why does this makes no sense? But if your world model is trained on that media picture, it makes perfect sense. The greatest risk, 30% of media coverage is murder, right? It's not the 0.1% or whatever it is in the chart, right? No one talks about the big things like the 30% heart disease, this, and this. It gets 2% coverage in the media, right? Because the incentives, again, it doesn't get clicks. It's something that is harder to control. It plays into different societal biases. But to go back, answer your question, because people are responding to the world model that they're building with the data that they're seeing every day. And without anchoring, and education cannot lift this alone, we can try to immunize people. We can try to give them a stable world model that's not easily collapsed with misinformation. But in reality, we're even at that age, we're already fighting with the phone, right? There's countries here in Asia, Australia, I think Malaysia is talking about it, Singapore is talking about it now, who are like, we don't need to ban these devices out of schools. We need to ban social media till 16. That's the right thing to do. It's no question, right? Because otherwise, your world model gets collapsed. And to add, the AI sprinkle on top, think about this. Most countries have a founding story. Most countries have a culture. Most countries have, ethos, and they're building the belonging of their citizens, right? And to protect that, you couldn't just publish a book and say this should be taught in school. School books go through committees, universities select the material. We're trying to assess quality to make sure that people get a good education, right? And now AI comes in and everyone is like, the kids should use AI. But that AI is trained on books that are, especially here in Asia, when you look at it, completely culture alien, right? If you're in Malaysia, you're using a book in like an American model, beer, not halal, whatever it is. It's not in sync with your societal setup. And we're just ignoring those protections that we used to put in place. The same protections we used to have for the media, for media ownership, for truth in reporting, all these other things, right? Why? Because fundamentally, someone is giving us a choice. Here is snake oil. You adopt AI and your economy will grow and you have to do nothing. You have to do no big fights with other stakeholders. You just have to believe us, look at the successful business people we are. Or you do the hard things. What are you going to do? Right? And the elephant in the room is that everyone in the global economy, in the capitalist economy, is locked in the room with the United States. And if the United States decides that it does not want environmental regulation anymore, you're not competitive with the United States. So the question is, at which point do you stop competing with the United States on their own terms or not? Right? But to make something aggressive, you have to offer an alternative. and no one is offering an alternative. And I don't think an alternative can emerge, because you're not, like, we can talk, we met on LinkedIn, right? Like LinkedIn deplatforms posts about digital sovereignty. You can run 1 million tests. It's, hundreds of people who have observed this at this point.
Explain what it is, please.
The LinkedIn algorithm will reduce reach for posts that are arguing for digital sovereignty and privacy and these kind of things. And I know how these algorithms are built. It doesn't have to be an intentional choice. It can be. Elon clearly is playing with the algorithms in ways no one else has before, but it can be. And I wouldn't take it on trust. But how can you even have the healthy debate that is needed, right? Our founding principles in Germany and everywhere else are like, a free press is necessary, informed citizens is necessary. But at the same time, we're not willing to stand up for that. The moment the question becomes growth by technology, whether or not it's real or not, right? If you're an economist, you look at it and you go like, but how is it going to grow? Consumption is bounded by time. How is it going to grow the economy? It's not, right? It is a redistribution. It takes from people who create, creators, workers, IP holders, everyone, and it allocates it to tech people, right? And there's a new economy being built as a result, which is an economy. It's very similar to the 1920s, I think, where industrialization. It's an economy where the people owning the machines own everything, right? And they're using the money that they already have to buy the critical infrastructure of society, the power, and so on, right? You're now at the point in the United States where AI investment is 50% of GDP. And when, the things start wobbling, because clearly, the accounting is a bit off, then the big people from Silicon Valley come out and say, we cannot afford to lose against China. We cannot afford AI to fail. It's classic snake oil. It's, again, in this case, the United States government was sold a very simple narrative. You can avoid losing against China, who by now own the supply chain, own manufacturing, own science, lead in many of the future technologies, right? You've outsourced all the jobs, you've outsourced and destroyed your best engineering centers, Boeing, Intel, all by yourself. Wasn't evil China, you just outsourced it all, right? And these companies are failing and they're not competitive anymore. Then you spent 10 years blocking Chinese technology that was getting advanced, right? 5G, EVs, solar panels, TikTok, and so on. So you're already protectionist. You're protecting your companies, which become even less competitive. And now these guys come along and they're saying we can still win if we just pump enough compute into AI. It's snake oil, but it's irresistible because no one else has another plan. Because all other plans would involve 20 years of hardship, of hard working, actually competing with China, which they cannot.
Somehow every time we speak, we come to the very gloom place. I know.
You can't avoid that. Like, what I argue for is leadership, right?
A pessimist is a well-informed realist.
Yeah, maybe, but like, look, what I founded this nonprofit Center for AI Leadership because really I wanted to do leadership, not AI, and because from my perspective, leadership is the missing piece, right? To crystallize these movements, you need leaders. To have an alternative, you need an alternative vision, and you need leadership towards that alternative vision. There is no alternative vision in Europe, and as a result, people are parroting the same things the tech pros are telling them. The UK, tragically, is selling out its sovereignty, its data, everything at the height of the boom. So they're paying an ultra premium, right? With like no regard, because there is no leadership, no willingness to challenge. And the thing what I'm saying is, it's actually not hard to challenge. You
I'm
can
gonna
come to
challenge you here, Georg, because we just said, and I agree with you here that the fundamental problem is capitalism, and whichever business model you're trying to build on capitalism, you're going to face a problem of growth and solving the growth. So what you are saying is that if we do have the leaders, then they should be able to offer a new vision, but then this new vision, it will still be bounded to capitalism unless we have like the new, I don't know, post-growth model or whatever it is, and then we say, okay, like when you need the new whatever Marx or like Adam Smith or whatever it is.
Yeah, and then it gets ideological, and right,
Yeah.
you're already in an ideological cage. Um, uh, growing up in Germany, right, the standard is democracy is the best form of government, worst form of government except everything else. We all tell our founding story. I lived in Canada, I lived in the United States, I lived in Singapore now for more than a decade. I greatly admire Lee Kuan Yew. I think we saw many of these things many years before they happened, right? And I think most of it is fallacies. No one says democracy has to be executed the way it is right now. The 4 years or 5 years and this and that. Capitalism is what people define it, right? China is not communist, but it's also not capitalist, right? The word has changed, the meaning has changed, right? There are many pockets of the Chinese economy that are so hyper-capitalist, it's no wonder the United States cannot win, right? But at the same time, you have a government that is running one fundamentally different trade-off, which is in good times you can make your money, but in bad times we're going to compel you to support society, right? The open source movement that you see right now is partially compelled by the government, because there's good papers on that and so on, like the strategy, which is basically, you made all this money, like take DeepSeek, right? You're this successful hedge fund and you made all this money. It's your time to give back to society, right? If the economy goes dire in China, then companies are instructed to employ workers and the CEO will have to take a pay cut, right? Or even put that house on the market that they bought in order to do it right? Different trade-off. And if you look at that with, ideological, it's obviously deeply nuanced. But if you're just looking with ideological blenders, you're like, it's communist, it doesn't work, right? There are many great thinkers in Europe, like Varoufakis from Greece, for example, and so on, who've analyzed this to death, right? The main problem I think you have in all established economies and democracies is that governments are managers. It's a management problem. We have people who manage the status quo, who have their hands full in trying to keep the status quo running while the world is changing around them. And it's building a tech debt over years, a structural debt in society because the world is changing and the fundamentals that the state was built on are changing, that no one can address because you cannot touch the constitutions, you cannot touch the core consensus. And if you say the wrong thing, then the next party get voted in and no one has more than a 5-year planning radius. It's dead. It doesn't work. It is going to collapse. We can all, talk around that, but it's going to collapse because it cannot renew itself, right? So the problem is leadership development. When you're looking at Singapore, which is the prototype for China, that's where Deng Xiaoping learned what he did, right? Singapore runs leadership development, obviously hard to do in the same way, but China managed to do it in a way that leaders are built. Our cabinet ministers rotate their resorts every 2 years. We switched our successful health minister in the pandemic and sent him to education and brought someone else in, not because he was failing, but because leadership development required him to learn about all these facets, because one of these guys is going to become prime minister and he better understands the entire country, right? And contrast that to career politicians in Europe, right? China has 80% STEM in their leadership, the decision makers. you cannot bullshit them out about AI.
STEM, you mean STEM as like a background in STEM
science,
or education?
technology,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In the US and in Europe, it's primarily lawyers and a few other overrepresented professions, right? But what that means is in China, you go to them, you try to bullshit them about the technology. They're like, no, that's not how it works, right? I know my friend from school, he's into that. I asked about that. That's bullshit. In China, they're drafting the heads of the companies like Alibaba to regulate the industry. And they give them a KPI. They say, if you don't meet these societal goals, you're not going to run your company anymore. That infringes upon their, let's say, entrepreneurial freedom, but in the way that a state is supposed to infringe on by saying, here are the societal guardrails, whether or not you like what China is doing or not, right? Obviously, we in Europe have different views on freedom and all of these other things, right? But it is hard to assail that actively standing up for, founding principles or a long range vision is a problem, right? Like I come from Germany. If you ask like what was the strategy for the government in the last 15 years, it was like doing nothing. Angela Merkel's signature move was doing nothing. It will be okay, right? And that's because the population by default also wants that. Otherwise, she wouldn't get elected. But the problem is without leaders, without people who point into a direction and paint a positive, maybe hardship here on the way, but there, on the hill lies our destiny. Without that, you're going to die somewhere on lower ground when the flood comes, right? And it's human nature to go into denial. I think we saw that in COVID. I was here in Asia. Our, people looked at the math and they went like, yeah, at this reproduction rate and so on, we're going to have to do something, right? And we did something. And then it came to Italy. And we're like, why this chaos? Why were they not prepared? And then even worse, it went to the UK and we're like, but they're an island like us. Why were they running rock concert and flying in people all over Europe when the math said it was going to spread like this? And it's, science, biology, math, you look at it and there's no question. You don't need to ask. It's exactly the same as with technology. You don't need to ask, how will the future look like if you can do math on a virus, right? But we are at a point where that math is telling you that you're sacrificing growth and you're not willing to do it. So call a spade a spade. It's what you're seeing in every dimension is an unwillingness to sacrifice growth and an unwillingness to build long-term plans. And without long-term plans and without people who argue for them and lead them, and without people like that having a voice because they're getting algorithmically drowned, because they're getting drowned in garbage, right? Why watch that one video if you don't other? It's possible if you look at Mandani in New York, right? He's playing at the very edge of what is even possible to say in the American system, right? The word socialist is like, sounds like terrorist to Americans, right? So he is at the very edge of the system. You can say he's like talking about abolishing capitalism, but I don't think that has to be necessarily the goal first. You have to create momentum, at least into the direction of maybe we shouldn't let capitalism run everything in society, right? There's I have a theory, which is the success of capitalism is vastly overstated because it came from factors that were completely unrelated to it. Growth, demographic growth. Every person born more than gives you free growth. And the other thing is that we traded off the commons and we traded off quality, right? Economic activity in the United States, you getting hit by a truck is economic activity because healthcare is, well, you're laughing, but it is. Healthcare is fundamentally for profit, right? So we changed things in society that were meant to benefit you. We privatized things and we eroded quality, right? There used to be unspoken things like the seat in the cinema or the seat on the plane wasn't priced per seat. It was priced, there were two classes. So you were roughly among equal, not as equal as first class or something like that. Now you're priced exactly at every step in society. Wherever you go, you're priced at what you make, right? This process of selling the commons, of putting a gate in front of the park that you cannot go in anymore because you don't have a membership, of extracting quality. There's a single country on the planet that has resisted the quality erosion, Japan, for whatever reason, right? You have planned obsolences. You can't argue that your TV is better today than it was 5 years ago. You can't argue that Google Maps, all these digital products, Gmail are better. They're worse because there are more ads, there's more value extraction. Many of the features have been shut down, right? So capitalism is it's almost like reinforcement learning. It's a algorithm that optimizes, but once it starts hitting a certain point, it starts overfitting, and society doesn't benefit anymore. And we're about 10 years into that process, right? And that requires leadership, because otherwise the autopilot runs us over the economic cliff, over the ecological cliff, and probably, other cliffs we don't want to run over.
I think what you're pointing to, it's not necessarily how we define it, like whether we use the words like capitalism, socialism, whatever it is. It's more of like, yeah, there needs to be certain structures, right? Like in China, the government has this role of like saying, no, but I'm the guardian of the social interests. In Europe, that's what it used to be, the church. Then with church disappearing or like diminishing its influence, it was more media. It was like certain social structures. Now with the digital world, all of them are gone. And essentially we have a very like nominal government, that is just there like for tradition. Let's say it's almost like the king in the UK.
Management, right? Just keep it running.
Well, kind of, yes. Not even understanding like how it runs eventually.
But that's the problem, right? Technology, like I keep saying, technology has become the church, right? In Europe, the church runs everything around 1100, right? The kings go and bow, and if they try to upset the church, eventually they have to crawl and kiss the Pope's feet. And everything was fine until the event of the printing machine. Right, which initially the church was super elated about, because when they were like, well, the only mass-produced book is the Bible, and we do it by hand, and now we can do it automatically. But the side effect was that 100 years later or 60 years later, Luther's manifesto was printed and ended up spinning Europe into 100 years of war, right? Which created our world order today, the Westphalia system, right? We were so fed up with every village being pillaged for some 30 years that we said, okay, let's freeze the borders and never touch them again. And ironically, today we have people who are like, we should start annexing Greenland, and we should borders shouldn't be. We're going back this far, basically, in history at this point. And I have to hope that it's not only great calamity like a world war that can create something like the European project, right, or the Westphalia peace agreement, right, or all the achievements out of the French Revolution and whatnot, which was incredibly bloody. We have to hope that that isn't the only way this can be made, right? But here we are, 3 generations away from the Great War and the European project, which was designed to prevent that ever happening again in Europe. And like the German government can't even get itself to really speak strongly on these topics anymore, because they are basically run by the polls, and the polls are run by social media. And the KPI basically, I think, was probably misdesigned. It worked only for the brief time that people had a memory of how bad things can become. Right? The question is, can we get renewal? Can we have people who deliver a different vision? China has a different vision. We must not like it, but maybe we can have our own, right? Maybe is principles that still unite people by value. But it won't if everyone trains on short form video pushed. Elon, right, changed last week. Elon changed X to show where people are from, right? I'm not sure if you saw this, but it's phenomenal because it has shown that the vast majority of people who are creating polarization, the biggest accounts on X, MAGA, and like on both sides, but 60% I think on that side are from Pakistan, India, Vietnam. Why? Because you get paid for engagement, right? So what people are looking at these at, say, social media platform, but actually it's destabilization and propaganda as a service. And it's insidious because it works organically. People are just getting paid for what creates view. So screaming divisive views at Americans, appealing to racism, appealing to, you know, the role of women or whatever, getting people to engage with you, even as counter speech, as saying you're an idiot, all of it they're getting paid for, and all of it basically pushes the polarization to the front. It must lead to societal collapse. There is just no other way when you realize that that is what creates the world model for people when they're online now.
Explain please how they're getting paid for that. We're not talking about like paid ads specific, right? Like all like
They get paid. You
promoting.
get paid for engagement on X. X pays you for engagement.
Pays you as like in
There's a monthly
money or?
payout. Yes.
So if you are
YouTube pays you for your views, right?
If you're a creator.
Yes.
But how does it work on X? Because I'm sorry, I'm not familiar. So basically, if they're a creator, then they're getting paid.
You flag yourself as a creator, you get a certain amount of views, you start getting paid a tiny piece of the rev share from the advertisements.
So
same
it doesn't
YouTube,
have
same business model. So YouTube is the much bigger fish in the room here, by the way, because it's the same thing.
But YouTube doesn't pay you for your comments, right? YouTube only pays you for people viewing your content, whereas what you're saying is if I post something on X, then
but it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing as content, right? If I post a divisive video, it will
go viral. Yeah,
it will go viral, and I get paid. And advertisers at this point don't even have the tools anymore to ensure brand safety. They've given up on that. Most of them are afraid to even think about it, because if they accidentally mute let's say, a view that was completely unacceptable 5 years ago, but now is fully acceptable, like women shouldn't be in the workplace or anything like that, what you get from, you know, people in the US. So brand safety is dead, and they're getting paid. The social media is speech amplification, right? It's always blah, marketplace of idea, counters. No, it's speech amplification. You pay to have your message heard. And if you can create a system where people get paid to put out your message because your message is divisive to society, right? Then you win. Look at it this way. First principles. What is trust? Right? Trust in society is almost like power. It's a multiplier on every societal interaction, not even just transaction. I meet you, I swipe my credit card in your store. In my head, there's a brief moment where I go, is this safe? I meet you for a business transaction. You send me an email. Will I engage with you? At every single point, there's a tiny piece in my head that goes, is it safe? I live in Singapore. We have a very, very low friction on trust, because we have a phenomenally efficient government. So you're barely afraid of having your credit card stolen. Your car cannot really get stolen. It's never going to get off the island. You leave your wallet on the table, 90% chance it's still there when you come back. Some people reserve a table in the food center with their wallet, right? It makes everything simpler. If your trust goes low, people need to start alarm system. People need to buy software to analyze whether or not a transaction is safe, right? People will need to get credit reports from their renters. People will people will ask for your CV and, you know, 4 references before you can make a rental, all of these things. So the more trust is lost in society as a thing, right? The more people become untrusting, the more economic activity suffers. But at the same time, if you can create businesses that benefit from that, you can make money. Alarm companies or, private security is a great example. In Singapore, why would you need that? I mean, you need to have some, old people as security guards at your condo or something. But in general, you don't need bodyguards. You don't need any of that, right? You don't even need to, and no one has an alarm system in their house, right? At least the vast majority not. So when you factor that in, you realize the problem becomes that how does trust work? Trust gets destroyed very easily when bad things happen to us at scale. Now you have Meta pushing scams at everyone, and they're the best because their algorithms are the best. And they have predominantly, that report says we have predominantly old people, they have no defenses, and we are the platform with the least friction. But if we put up the friction, then we lose money. So we need your permission to do that. Oh, we don't have it. Okay, good. Right. So now what we have here is a massive crime wave. Our crime rate isn't going down anymore, but it's not physical at all. It's all online, and it's all on Facebook Marketplace. Right. And so the question becomes, why don't we just ban these people? Like, why don't we just ban that? I mean, there's a few other providers. You shoot one of them, like kill the chicken to scare the monkey, to use like a local term, and things will get better. The answer is, well, not that easily. We're small as a country, right? If we force them to do something, then every other government will. So they will put up that fight. And B, they can come and say, well, by the way, most of your healthcare system runs on WhatsApp, and it's a shame your government documents are on American servers, and whatever it is. And you realize very quickly, well, this is already out of the scope of a small country. The EU is the only force in the world outside of China and India who still have the power together to compel. And they're being splintered, not by accident. And anyone, in Europe who's thinking somehow that, if you take that AFD thing, like getting out of Europe, has zero benefits. Because you're in a world full of sharks, and, the school of fish still kind of has a chance, but if you're all splintering into individual countries, there's nothing. So that what shocks me is the complete lack of leadership in that direction. Right. But I think in part it is because politicians are reactive. They look at what polls well in order to define their positions, because it's the game, right? But you need someone who breaks the game. Otherwise, it just ends in calamity.
You have children, don't you?
A son, yes.
Son. What are you teaching your son?
Don't trust the internet. No, I mean, I had this moment where I looked at what he did with Claude, right? And I saw there was homework in there. And, I had that conversation. I don't know, there's a value in not downloading too much of this information purely because agency, like what are you going to do about it? Right. And if you want leaders, I think you also need people to develop their own positions. Right. But I'm like anyone who worked in Silicon Valley, I'm extremely negative on social media. I blocked all of it. I blocked WhatsApp and so on, as in you can't have it. I'm sorry. Until the point when the pandemic happened and social life shifted to WhatsApp. Class meetups shifted to WhatsApp. That's the problem. Right? We have no non-commercialized space anymore. Like, we should have the equivalent to that park that is public for the space, but that would be a cost center, and it would take away from the economy. Now, never mind that none of this money actually ends up in our economies. It goes to Silicon Valley, right? That's why this shouldn't be a hard conversation. at all. When I look at the policy positions, like the new German economic minister saying, well, we shouldn't go too hard on the tech companies because it would negatively affect German SMEs. I'm like, do you understand how much money they're paying in ad budget money? Like, they're being literally bled dry. It's a little bit like arguing we shouldn't build an alternative to the East India Company because our merchants can't ship goods anymore without them, right? Never mind that they're taking 80% of the profit for the transportation, right? It's a bit shocking.
Which skills are you teaching him?
The skills that you need right now, I think, is being curious. I think it's building a good world model before the internet gets to you. Right, so because of the block on computers early on, or like computer he has, but like phone and iPad and so on early on, he read a lot, so he's getting good foundational knowledge, you know, the stuff that isn't filled with AI slop just yet. I think the skill to evaluate, right, again, and to research is important. But when it comes to, you know, the conversations you would normally have had, which is what kind of job, what should you prepare? I have no answer to that. We're staring at another industrial revolution. It's going to be brutal. Even without, you know, AI agents being real, it's going to wipe out large job classes. Like the amount of productivity I can get out of something like Claude is scary, because I don't see how job beginners and companies that employ beginners and so on would be able to stand in that economy. So right now, I don't know, I'm taking it light. I'm actually saying, here, play some good old video games made before monetization got bad. Play SimCity, you'll learn about taxes. You know, play that U-boat simulation, you'll learn about World War II and supply chains and so on, and you learn making decisions.
You do allow him to play video games?
I'm a former video game developer. I was 15 years in the video game industry. And I think video games are great.
Selected video games? Which ones you don't allow? Do you allow like any kind of social media based?
Anything before 2015.
Fortnite? Fortnite? No Fortnite.
Yeah, a bit of Fortnite. No Roblox.
No, why?
But like things like Fortnite, we play together, so that's fine. But otherwise, yeah, it's more like a bit older games, things like SimCity and Civilization and so on, because they do pack a decent amount of knowledge in them and systems thinking, I think, which is really important. Ask anyone, you know, why taxes are important and so on. If they're not learning it from a book. You run SimCity for a bit, and you know, you make those trade-offs. You see the effects in either direction. You learn evaluating things. I'm a firm believer in that. I'm a believer in video games being highly educational, primarily because I grew up with them. And the time when I still worked in that industry, there was like, even games like Assassin's Creed, like we tried to put as much history and learning into it as we could. It was part of the mission to do that. I'm not sure if that's still the same today, given the revenue pressures and so on, but it was very serious actually for companies like Ubisoft at the time.
Do you teach him any digital skills, or what anyways should we understand under digital skills these days?
I don't, like, we're in Singapore, so these things are in the school curriculum, right? When the pandemic happened, the entire country reconfigured in 3 days to run school from online, because the plans were already drafted up long before, right? Singapore had a pandemic, the start of a pandemic with SARS, right? It was one of the countries hit hard, and it learned all the lessons from it. So when COVID happened, the responses were already, right? The plans, as usual, some hiccups when reality hit planning, but we were online and running, and you know, he was doing sports classes out of the living room and stuff like that within days, while my friends in Germany were like, yeah, they were weeks, if not months lost, right? But again, planning, these are not things that are theoretical depth, right? Especially if you had the experience once, you have a plan and you execute it, right? So a lot of the digital stuff and so on, I don't worry too much about it. Like he has his own computer, I foster him his curiosity. He can, upgrade it and play around with these things, and I encourage him to understand. But like I also don't want to force it, because for me it's more foster creativeness versus consumption. Consumption just has no value, right? And I would argue that the majority of time that you spend consuming, if you are in your formative years, is basically lost, and that will be what makes the difference in the end, way more than which school you went on or this or that.
One last question: do you have any tip for somebody who has just listened to this, who wants to figure out, like, well, what should they do in the world that's changing so rapidly? What should they do for themselves, with their kids? What's the way forward? Just a normal person, not kind of somebody who's
I mean,
high-end politician or.
the number one thing that is going to confound the economy right now is AI, right? The challenge with it is that everyone is being told, if you just adopt it, you'll be fine. The machine, the people who don't adopt it will be replaced. Nothing could be further from the truth. The technology, explained super simple, is anything. If we take a large amount of output, labor output, images, whatever it is, sales pitches, even the things you do, the video you do, we have enough of it. We throw it into a machine. We can make a machine that replaces the creator, right? You take all of YouTube, and now you have AI models that make YouTube videos, right? That applies to everything. There's no limitations to that whatsoever. Anything that has patterns, the machine will learn the patterns if enough data is given, right? Which means we are now growing up in a world that has two differences. One, we have the knowledge of the entire world easily discoverable on our hands. It was easy with Google. It is much easier now with AI. That knowledge is filtered. It's not, unfortunately, clean. We're polluting it, just like we're polluting the environment and the air and whatnot. And the pollution is going to be the number one defining problem going forward. Because if you drink too much of it, you're going into psychosis, or you are making decisions like they are making in the US that make no sense, because you've been, you're hallucinating, right? So you have to engage with the technology. You cannot not look at it. It's like looking at a steam engine, and you have to understand it, because much of all of the economic activity today is around it, right? We created a singular economy, which means if you're in sustainability, well, you're going to lay off because you don't get money. If you're in any other thing, you're laid off, you're not going to make money. So everyone paints a new sign on their front door and says AI. Everyone updates their LinkedIn profile. No profession grows faster than LinkedIn AI experts on LinkedIn, right? Which also means it's completely useless. You can't find AI experts because everyone says they are one, right? So what I would encourage people to do is go to fundamental thinking and really asking, well, if this has changed, where's the opportunities? Some industries I don't think have opportunity anymore, right? I'm not going to spell anyone out because that makes people upset, but there are industries where this pattern matching is a complete slam dunk. Let's say voice acting. No one will pay for that except those 1%, just like 1% maybe pay for horse carriage rides today at a premium, right? But that doesn't help 90% of the people in that profession. So look at the areas and be civil-minded about it. Ask yourself, how likely is it that my government will step in and pick me up, because that's what Silicon Valley says government needs to do, right? And then decide what your next action is, whether or not it starts leaning on your government, right, or leaning on finding a direction where opportunity lies in that space. We're looking at a great disruption, just like 1920s and like before industrialization. So the old truth, learn this, learn that, and so on, are changing. And I wouldn't primarily listen to the people who are selling the technology. I would try to get a hands-on experience, get a feel for it, especially in context of your own job, because you're an expert in your own job, right? If you can stay objective while you use the technology, if you can get rid of those gnawing feelings that scare you when you use it and you are realizing how close it might come, and if you can evaluate that, then it can give you a decent idea also where the technology fails and where the human value will shift, right? It will not replace lawyers, for example, not if we let them, right? If we, because it cannot do it, the reliability cannot be there, it cannot do what is being promised, but that doesn't mean it can't happen, right? If we basically say we're willing to allow 10% to be wrongly convicted, then we can probably replace the lawyers. That is the actual question, right? For AI to work in healthcare, in law, and so on, really work at the level that these people are selling, we would have to massively degrade our quality expectations.
Which is what's happening.
Well, and which is where, again, the only voice you still have left is your vote. If you have even options to vote for, and if you don't have options, maybe you should become the option, because what else is left?
Thank you. It was a fascinating conversation.
I wish it had a more positive note, but alas.
It's how it is.